France 24's reporter Andrew Hilliar, who authored that report, is covering the fallout of Monday's popular vote, and he joins us now from the capital, Tunis. Andrew, over to you.
Yeah, Tom, well, thanks for that. Vote counting still underway here in the capital, Tunis. So we're expecting those results later on today. But already late last night here in the centre of the capital, President Kais Saied supporters were out on the streets celebrating. We heard them beeping their car horns late into the night because despite the fact that we don't have official results, they reckon they've got this one in the bag. On the other hand, the opposition has called the entire process completely illegitimate. They called for a boycott, and it would seem that many people who would have otherwise voted now have actually heeded those calls for a boycott. So a very deeply divided society here in Tunisia. But one thing most Tunisians of all political persuasions can agree on is the fact that they don't want business as usual. They want to break with the past 10 years of political deadlock. Now, I want to bring in an economist. I want to bring in Fadel Kaboub. He is the he's the president of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Now, you're also a professor at Denison University in the US, but you grew up here in Tunis, so you know this place better than most people. I think that the first thing I want to ask you is, how did Tunisia get to this point after so much hope? What's not working? What's broken down?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. One of the main things that really was neglected after the uprisings of 2011 was the economic model. We've continued to use the same economic development model that we've used since the 1970s at least. And that's an extractive economic model that's based on very little value-added content in industries, that's based on imports of food, basic necessities, and as a result, a system of subsidies that's broken today, food subsidies, energy subsidies, and that accumulated a massive amount of external debt. Hence the mass unemployment, hence the fact that we have to go to the IMF as a lender of last resort to refuel the Tunisian economy pretty much every 5 to 10 years with massive injections. And the IMF is very clear. You're not getting any money unless you impose more austerity, which is mass youth unemployment, massive increases in poverty, especially the last few years with the COVID pandemic, with the conflict in the Ukraine. So all of the 10 consecutive administrations in the last 10, 12 years after the uprisings have failed to deliver on the economic front. And I've said it before, you can't really democratize a system that hasn't been decolonized yet economically in terms of the intellectual framework within which an economic development model needs to be developed.
So basically, what you're saying is that the problem here is that politicians are treating the root cause as if it was political, whereas what you're saying is the root cause is, above all, fundamentally economic.
Don't get me wrong, there are political problems. There's corruption, so there's cartels that control different segments of the economy, and that is true. But when you use the exact same economic development model that relies on tourism, exports, FDI, remittances, all of these appear to be solutions because they generate foreign currency reserves, they create jobs, but in fact they're traps, they're structural traps for a country that lacks food sovereignty, that lacks energy sovereignty, and that lacks high value-added content in manufacturing. I'll give you a quick example. Tourism is great. It brings, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of foreign currency reserves. It brings in, lots of jobs and transportation and hotels.
Which has, of course, taken a big hit, especially in 2015 when we saw those terrorist attacks.
But even when it's working really well, one of the things that tourism does is that you host 10 million tourists, you have to feed them, so you increase food imports that you don't have, and you have to transport them, heat and cool the hotels, so you end up with even more energy imports. And these are two of the biggest structural problems that we have in our trade balance, and it creates a situation where it puts downward pressure on the value of the dinar relative to the euro or the dollar, and that forces the central bank to go out and borrow even more dollars. And it's structural, so it goes on and on and on. And you're trapped. So if we had, for example, food sovereignty or energy sovereignty, or at least a higher degree of food sovereignty, a higher degree of energy sovereignty, the tourism industry would be a net positive, but it's not, and yet we treat it as a solution. Same thing for FDI, same thing for remittances and the brain drain that we'll lose from Tunisia. All of these standard economic development strategies that the last several administrations, including, to be honest, President Said's administration, we haven't heard any alternative from him yet.
Let's just get into, you were talking about the brain drain, youth unemployment. That's a big problem here. We were just playing a report there where we visited the town of Kasserine, some 300 kilometers from the capital, Tunis. There's a high rate of unemployment there. Across Tunisia, it's the youth unemployment rate standing at something like 40%. Right. What measures can Tunisian politicians put in place to get more people in work?
So, patchwork solutions to just create jobs left and right or attract more foreign direct investment to do more of the same isn't going to work. We've been trying this for decades, during the Ben Ali regime, during the last 10 administrations, and so on. We're talking about looking at the sources of the problem. So creating jobs in industries in areas that create higher value-added content. We have some of the most qualified young people from engineering schools or technology, IT.
Many of whom end up going abroad because they can't find the work here.
Exactly, because we're not leveraging those industries and we're not being selective enough in terms of what kind of foreign direct investment we bring into the country. Are we racing to the bottom or do we want to race to the top? We've been racing to the bottom for decades. It's time to race to the top and leverage the skills and the hundreds of millions of dollars that the Tunisian government has spent over generations investing in youth. And yet all of it goes to waste, so to speak, with mass unemployment and economic despair and fueling further social and political tensions.
Fadel Kaboub, President of the Global Institute for Sustainable Prosperity. Thank you very much for your time. I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So, of course, as you heard there, as long as Tunisia's root fundamental problems, and most of them rooted in, of course, the country's economic problems, unless those problems get solved by politicians, it's very unlikely that President Kais Saied's draft constitution will really heal the country's social ills. We're going to see over the next few days and weeks more tensions on the streets as people opposed to the referendum come out and protest, whereas obviously on the other hand you'll have supporters of President Kais Saied who will also be out on the streets saying that that President Saied's vision for the country is a clear one and it's the only way forward. So we'll have to see in the next weeks and months ahead what will happen and just where Tunisia's future path will take it.
Okay, Andrew Hilliar with that special coverage from Tunis. Thank you very much.